The pastor stood under the holy lights, screaming that their children were sick because of their sins. But he was lying. Suddenly, a battered truck smashed through the perimeter fence, silencing the sermon. A masked stranger stepped out and hurled a rusting barrel of toxic waste directly at the preacher's feet. When he pulled down his mask to reveal the burn scars of a man who was supposed to be dead, the crowd froze in terror. He did not come to pray. He came to bring judgment. The town of Blackwood, West Virginia, sat in the throat of the valley like a swallowed stone. A perpetual, unnatural fog clung to the ground, swirling around the skeleton of the old coal mine that loomed over the residents. The trees that lined the main road were stripped bare, their branches reaching up like skeletal fingers, while the creek that ran through the center of town flowed with a sluggish, unnatural darkness. Jonas steered his battered 1990 Ford pickup truck down the winding mountain road. The bed of the truck was stacked high with firewood, a simple cover for a man who had no business returning to a place that had tried to kill him. Jonas was 38 years old, though the fire had aged him. He wore a heavy, dark gray hoodie with the hood pulled low, and a thick cloth mask covered the lower half of his face, concealing the ruin of burn scars that stretched from his jaw to his collarbone. He made no sound, for the vocal cords in his throat had been severed by smoke and heat 10 years ago. His eyes, dark and intense, were the only part of him that spoke. Beside him, on the torn vinyl seat, lay Kaiser, an 8-year-old German shepherd. The dog was a shadow of his former self. His coat was thin and patchy, revealing the gray skin beneath, and his muzzle was white with age. Kaiser was deaf in his left ear, a veteran of the same disaster that had silenced his master. He slept with his head on his paws, his breathing raspy. As the truck approached the old railway crossing, the vehicle rattled over the potholes. Suddenly, Kaiser's head snapped up. His ears swiveled forward, and a low whine vibrated in his throat. Jonas looked at the dog, confused. He felt nothing but the hum of the truck engine. A full 10 seconds later, the ground began to tremble. Jonas braked as a long, unmarked freight train thundered past the crossing in the darkness. It was moving fast, carrying covered cargo containers away from the closed mine. Jonas gripped the steering wheel. Kaiser had felt the deep earth vibrations long before the sound had reached human ears. The dog's hearing might have been fading, but his connection to the ground was sharper than ever. Jonas parked the truck near the perimeter of the old water treatment plant. He grabbed a small kit and stepped out into the damp night air. Kaiser followed, moving with a stiffness in his hips, but a focus in his eyes. They moved silently toward the forbidden creek behind the factory. Jonas knelt by the water. It smelled of sulfur and rot. He dipped a glass vial into the black liquid. As he screwed the cap on, he felt a firm, insistent paw swipe at his boot. He froze. Kaiser was standing rigid, his nose lifted to the wind, looking toward the factory fence. The dog did not bark. He knew the rules of the hunt. He pressed his body against Jonas's leg, a silent warning. A moment later, the beam of a flashlight cut through the fog, followed by the heavy boots of a security guard patrolling the perimeter. Jonas pocketed the vial and melted back into the shadows, his hand resting on Kaiser's head. They moved as one entity, a ghost and his hound, disappearing into the toxic mist before the light could find them. The morning sun struggled to pierce the heavy gray blanket of fog that suffocated Blackwood. As the townspeople gathered for their daily prayers, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd, standing before the weathered wooden doors of the community church. Plastered across the bulletin board were dozens of paper sheets, their edges fluttering in the damp breeze. They were water analysis reports, covered in complex chemical data, but the conclusion was circled in aggressive red ink. Across the center of the display, a message had been stenciled in stark black paint. God did not poison you, the water did. The heavy oak doors swung open, and Pastor Jeremiah stepped out. He was a man of 60, with a mane of carefully coiffed silver hair and eyes that could shift from grandfatherly warmth to icy steel in a heartbeat. He wore a pristine black suit that seemed out of place amidst the coal dust and decay of the town. Jeremiah ripped one of the papers from the board, crumpling it in his fist. "This is the work of the devil," his voice boomed, projecting effortlessly without a microphone. "He seeks to test our faith with lies and science. Do not listen to the serpent who whispers in the dark. Drive the strangers away, for they bring only doubt." Watching from the edge of the crowd was Gwen, the town's only doctor. She was 35 years old, with tired eyes framed by dark circles and hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore a faded medical coat over practical hiking clothes. She knew the reports were real. She had treated the rashes and the coughing children for months. Ignoring Jeremiah's sermon, Gwen turned and hiked toward the dense tree line bordering the forbidden zone, intending to collect her own soil samples to prove the contamination. She had not gone far when two heavy-set men stepped out from behind a cluster of dying pines. They were Jeremiah's enforcers, dressed in flannel and denim, their faces hardened by years of blind loyalty. "You are wandering too far, Doc," one of them sneered, blocking her path. "The pastor says this land is holy. No digging allowed." Gwen stood her ground, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I need those samples. People are dying." The men stepped closer, looming over her. Just then, the brush rustled. It was not a sound of panicked movement, but a slow, heavy approach. From the mist, Kaiser emerged. The old German shepherd looked like a phantom. His ribs showed through his thinning coat, and his gait was stiff, but he planted himself firmly between Gwen and the men. He did not bark. His vocal cords were too worn for that. Instead, he lowered his head, baring yellowed teeth, and a deep guttural vibration rolled from his chest. It was a sound of pure, primal menace. The men hesitated. There was something unnatural about the silent, unwavering ferocity of the dying animal. Unnerved, they backed away and disappeared into the fog. Gwen let out a breath she did not know she was holding. She looked down at her savior. The dog's breathing was heavy, rattling in his chest. As he looked up at her, she noticed the collar around his neck. It was a strip of cracked dark leather with a distinct hand-stitched pattern. Gwen fell to her knees, her hand trembling as she reached out. She knew that collar. She had bought it 10 years ago for a puppy she and Caleb had raised together. "Kaiser?" she whispered, tears filling her eyes as the dog leaned his heavy head against her hand. Gwen stood frozen at the edge of the forest, her hand still resting on the thick fur of the old German shepherd. From the swirling mist, the hooded figure of Jonas emerged. He moved with a heavy, uneven gait, stopping just a few feet away. He did not speak, but he pulled down his hood slightly, revealing eyes that Gwen had not seen in 10 years. They were dark, haunted, and filled with a desperate urgency. Without a word, he gestured for her to follow, turning back toward the shadowy silhouette of the mountain. They moved quickly through the underbrush, away from the prying eyes of the town. Jonas led them to a secluded ravine where the rusted entrance of mineshaft number 9 stood like a scar against the rock face. It had been boarded up and condemned since the explosion, a place ghost stories were made of. Jonas produced a heavy iron pry bar from his pack. With a groan of straining metal, the lock snapped, and the heavy wooden barrier creaked open, exhaling a breath of stale, damp air. Kaiser took the lead immediately. The German shepherd moved with a renewed purpose, his nose working overtime in the darkness. Jonas clicked on a flashlight, the beam cutting through the thick dust motes dancing in the air. The tunnel was narrow and suffocating, the timber supports rotting with age and moisture. Gwen followed close behind Jonas, her heart pounding against her ribs. They descended deeper into the earth. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of wet stone. Suddenly, Kaiser stopped. The dog stood rigid in the center of the tunnel, his ears flattened against his head. A low, vibrating whine escaped his throat. He backed away, bumping into Jonas's legs, and refused to go further. Then he let out a sharp, dry cough, looking up at his master with wide, fearful eyes. Jonas froze. He knew that look. In the old days, miners used canaries to detect invisible death. Now, Kaiser was the warning system. The dog was reacting to a change in the air quality that human senses were too dull to pick up. Methane, or perhaps something worse, was leaking into the shaft. Jonas moved with terrifying speed. He ripped open his pack and pulled out 2 industrial gas masks. He shoved one into Gwen's hands and pressed it against her face, his eyes pleading with her to breathe. He pulled his own mask on, concealing his scars once more. With the masks secured, Jonas patted Kaiser's side, signaling the dog to stay close behind them where the air was marginally clearer. They pushed forward past the invisible barrier. 100 yards deeper, the tunnel opened into a large excavation chamber. Gwen gasped, the sound muffled by her mask. The chamber was not empty. Stacked floor to ceiling were hundreds of rusted metal barrels. Some had corroded, oozing a thick neon green sludge that pooled on the rocky floor and seeped into the cracks of the earth. The labels on the barrels were faded, but the warning symbols for toxic industrial waste were unmistakable. This was not just a mine, it was a mass grave for poison, buried directly above the town's water table. The beam of Jonas's flashlight played over the corroding metal of the toxic barrels, illuminating the true cost of Blackwood's survival. Gwen was busy snapping photos with trembling hands, documenting the crime when the ground beneath them lurched violently. It was not an earthquake. A dull, heavy thud echoed from the tunnel entrance, followed by the terrifying sound of tons of rock and timber crashing down. The shockwave knocked Gwen to her knees. A thick cloud of dust billowed into the chamber, momentarily blinding them even through their protective masks. Jeremiah's men had not followed them in. Instead, they had triggered a controlled collapse at the mouth of the shaft, sealing the mine. They intended to bury the evidence and the witnesses in one stroke, framing it as a tragic accident caused by trespassers. Gwen scrambled to her feet, shining her light back toward the way they had come. A wall of rubble now blocked the passage. Panic clawed at her throat. She spun around, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid inside the rubber mask. The air in the tank would not last forever, and the toxic fumes from the barrels were already seeping through the dust. Jonas moved instantly. He grabbed Gwen by the shoulders, his grip firm and grounding. He looked deep into her eyes, his gaze steady and calm. He had spent half his life underground. He knew that panic consumed oxygen, and oxygen was now their most precious currency. He held up a hand, signaling her to be still. Then, Jonas did something that terrified Gwen. He reached up and clicked off his flashlight. Darkness, absolute and suffocating, swallowed them. Gwen reached out to grab his sleeve, but Jonas was already moving. He knelt on the rocky floor and placed a hand on Kaiser's flank. In the pitch-black silence, human eyes were useless. They needed a sense that thrived in the dark. "Find it!" Jonas tapped a rhythmic signal onto the dog's ribcage. Kaiser understood. The old German shepherd lowered his head, ignoring the chemical stench of the barrels. He closed his eyes and focused. He was searching for something subtle, a ghost of a sensation that no human could detect. He was hunting for a draft. Minutes dragged like hours. The only sound was the raspy intake of breath through their filters. Then Kaiser let out a soft, sharp whine. He moved away from the rubble, heading toward the back of the cavern where the ceiling sloped downward. Jonas turned his light back on, the beam cutting through the gloom. Kaiser was standing on a pile of loose shale, looking up at a jagged fissure in the rock ceiling, high above their heads. Spider webs around the crack were fluttering ever so slightly. Fresh air. It was a natural ventilation shaft, too small for a machine, but just wide enough for a desperate escape. Jonas scrambled up the shale pile. He interlaced his fingers, creating a step for Gwen. She placed her boot in his hands, and with a heave, he boosted her upward. She clawed at the rock, finding a grip, and pulled herself into the narrow chimney. Once she was secure, Jonas fashioned a makeshift harness from a length of rope in his pack and tied it around Kaiser's chest. He hoisted the heavy dog up to Gwen, who pulled him onto the ledge. Finally, Jonas climbed, his muscles burning, dragging himself out of the toxic tomb just as his air filter began to rattle with exhaustion. They emerged into the cool night air of the forest, gasping and alive. The annual night of prayer was meant to be a celebration of faith, but under the glare of the halogen floodlights, it felt more like an inquisition. A wooden stage had been erected in the center of the town square, looming over the gathered townsfolk like a judgment seat. Pastor Jeremiah stood at the podium, his silver hair gleaming under the artificial light, his voice amplified by the speakers until it echoed off the surrounding mountains. "You ask why sickness plagues our children," Jeremiah thundered, gripping the lectern. "You ask why the crops wither. It is not the water, it is not the earth, it is the sin in your hearts. God is punishing us for our lack of sacrifice." The crowd stood silent, heads bowed in shame and fear. But then a low, mechanical growl began to rise from the darkness beyond the perimeter of the square. It grew louder, a roaring crescendo that drowned out the pastor's sermon. Suddenly, the wooden perimeter fence splintered with a deafening noise as Jonas's battered Ford pickup truck smashed through the barrier. The crowd screamed and scattered, parting like the sea as the vehicle skidded to a halt just yards from the stage. Dust swirled in the beams of the headlights. The driver's side door groaned open, and Jonas stepped out. He was covered in soot and cave mud, looking like a demon dredged up from the underworld. He strode to the bed of the truck and hauled out a rusted metal drum. With a grunt of exertion, he hurled it onto the pavement at the foot of the stage. The metal drum split open upon impact. A thick, viscous black sludge oozed out, spreading across the clean concrete. Immediately, the air was filled with the acrid, stinging scent of chemical rot. The smell was unmistakable and nauseating. Before the shocked silence could break, Gwen stepped out from the passenger side of the truck. She was covered in dirt, her face streaked with grime, holding a battery-powered megaphone. She did not look like a doctor, she looked like a survivor. "Look at it!" Gwen's amplified voice cut through the square. "This is what he buried beneath your feet. This is what is killing your children." Jeremiah stood frozen on the stage, his face pale. "That is a lie," he shouted, though his voice wavered without the microphone. "Get them out of here!" Jonas walked forward, stepping into the pool of light. He reached up with both hands and slowly pulled the cloth mask from his face. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The burn scars that twisted his jaw and neck were not just injuries. They were a map of the town's history, a brutal reminder of the mine fire 10 years ago that everyone had tried to forget. He was the living proof of the cover-up. Jeremiah looked at the scarred face of the man he had tried to silence a decade ago. The realization that his past had literally climbed out of the grave to confront him was too much. The facade of the holy man cracked. "I did what I had to do," Jeremiah screamed, his voice cracking with panic as he pointed a shaking finger at the crowd. "I took the money to save this dying town. Without me, you would all be starving." The confession hung in the cold night air, stripping away the last of his power. The wail of sirens pierced the night, signaling the end of Jeremiah's reign. Blue and red strobe lights cut through the darkness as a convoy of black SUVs bearing the insignias of the FBI and the Environmental Protection Agency swarmed the town square. Gwen had made the call hours ago, the moment they had escaped the mine, ensuring that justice would arrive before the pastor could spin another lie. Jeremiah did not fight. As the federal agents ascended the stage, the man who had held Blackwood in his thrall for a decade seemed to shrink inside his pristine suit. He allowed himself to be handcuffed without a word. As he was led down the steps, the crowd parted silently. No one shouted. No one attacked him. Instead, a few miners reached down, grabbed handfuls of the blackened earth, and tossed the dirt at his feet. It was a silent, crushing act of rejection. Jeremiah lowered his head, unable to meet the eyes of the people he had poisoned, and was guided into the back of a patrol car. By the time the sun crested the mountains the next morning, the unnatural fog that had plagued the valley for years seemed to be thinning. For the first time in a decade, weak rays of sunlight touched the church steeple. Gwen ran up the path to the small, abandoned hunting cabin where Jonas had been staying. Her heart pounded with a mix of hope and dread. She pushed the door open, breathless. The room was empty. The cot was made, the fireplace cold. Jonas was gone, vanishing as quietly as he had arrived. Gwen walked to the rough-hewn table in the center of the room. There were two items left behind. The first was a small terracotta pot containing a vibrant green pine sapling, a symbol of life that could still grow in the poisoned soil. Beside it lay the old, cracked leather collar that Kaiser had worn when he arrived. Gwen picked up the collar, running her thumb over the worn stitching. It was not a goodbye, it was a permission to let go of the past. Caleb was truly gone, but the town he loved had a chance to breathe again. Miles away, on a winding mountain pass that climbed out of the valley, the battered Ford pickup truck rattled over the asphalt. Jonas sat behind the wheel, his face once again obscured by the heavy cloth mask and the hood of his sweatshirt. He looked in the rearview mirror one last time as the town of Blackwood disappeared behind a ridge. Beside him, Kaiser stood on the passenger seat. The old German shepherd pushed his head out of the half-open window. His ears flapped in the cold mountain breeze, and his eyes were closed in pure contentment. He could not hear the wind, but he could feel it rushing against his fur. They were ghosts of the road, drifting onto the next horizon, forever searching for the next silence that needed to be broken. Jonas and Kaiser remind us that you do not need a loud voice to shake the world, just a brave heart and a loyal friend. They walked into the darkness so others could see the light, proving that true heroes ask for nothing in return. If this silent bond resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing this video to help our pack grow. We read every comment and cherish your support. The road does not end here, so click the video on your screen now and let us discover the next chapter together.